Yat Kinsale Drake in the share nat od in the Pachin in the Shle, Bilagana Bashichin, a Shihadashe, Bilagana Dashanelle, a good ego at Sun in the Shle. Hi, my name is Kinsale Drake. I'm a performer, a poet, and a musician, and I am from Southern Utah and Southern California. I've been writing poetry since I was about 7 or 8, and I've been making music my whole life, so I've really had a very musical upbringing, but poetry, I started getting more serious in high school. I started reading Louise Erdrich and Leslie Marmon Silko, Simon Ortiz, a lot of Native poets, because the poetry I felt like I learned in school, though it was really limited, it didn't give me the language I think I needed to articulate what I was experiencing as like a Native teen, so I was experiencing a lot of grief. I was going through, relationship troubles, I was experiencing racism, and I just did not have an outlet where I felt like I could properly express myself. So poetry was a way for me to articulate how I felt, situating myself within the world, but also talking about stories that my family told me when I was growing up, especially my grandmother. And she passed when I was in high school, and that was when I was really using poems as a way to talk about grief and to talk about really heavy subjects and make them complex and still a way for people to understand me, but not kind of laying everything bare, not kind of trauma dumping. So poetry for me has been a really beautiful tool to express how I feel and who I am, but it also is something really useful, I think, that you can have to be proud of. So every time I make a poem and it's super complex, or it has this really interesting form, or it sounds a certain way that I really wanted it to sound, I feel really proud of what I've made. And I think that's also something really important to have, is something that you love truly, that you can be proud of once you have a finished product. Mid-morning lullaby. Praise my mother, praise her hands. I feel I write about hands too much, but sometimes they're all I remember at first. Palms smoothing as my mother's laugh dissolves the edges of memory. Navajos are hairless, she murmurs, and the sound rolls like ancient waves over what remains of prehistoric oceans, fish bones and kelp dust that now fertilize the great saguaro, the piñons, the prickly pear. Whatever words I offer back to my mother, siphon deep blue over the great head of earth, I recall its shape well, how pine trees darken its apex skyscrape body of red earth where we sat, her long arms, thin wrists, the only fading bits. But is this not how each remembering is catalyzed? Only by what is held out to us, soft and belly up, fossilized. When you're coming into poetry and storytelling, I think it's easy to feel isolated a lot of the time and to not see yourself represented in anything from publishing to what's on the radio, what's in curriculums in your classroom. And though that is true, there's also a world of Native writers that want to support you and to support your work, and that want to show you that storytelling and poetry are a part of our long genealogy of who we are. Like, so many communities have stories that they've been telling for centuries, since time immemorial. Poetry has been practiced for hundreds of years, and even though representation might not reflect that, that's because we are not always the ones in charge of distributing that media. But I just want to make clear that there's always people who are there to help you, and there's always going to be people who want to get your stuff published, and they're always going to want to hear your poems, and they're always going to want to try to share your work with the world. And so if you find those little niches or those communities where you can find support, whether that's Indigenous Nations poets, whether that's a little writing group you make, you can reach out to anyone you admire. I think, myself included, if you reach out to a Native artist over Instagram or something, they will be so happy to talk about your work, to talk about publishing. If you find a community that can support you, I think you'll feel so much less alone, and it'll help you create at an even greater level. So look for a support system. Don't be afraid to share your words, and know that it is part of your long history of your community, wherever you're coming from. Indian boy. Indian boy, brown baby, lemon grove, you caught hummingbirds between your teeth, and their wings brushed your palate ribbed and pink. My heart opens itself like a peel-back can. Indian boy, I knew someone with your skin, washed with grooves like the riverbank. Come whistle the tune of an ancient war. The one, that one, make me remember. I think from poetry to making music, I play in a punk band sometimes, and whatever it is, the most important thing that it's provided for me is a creative outlet where I can kind of break down what I'm experiencing, whether that's grief. I usually use poetry to break down really strong emotions and memories. Anger, music, even poetry, you can write like diss tracks or kind of angry odes to things. Journaling, I think, also is really helpful. It's really helpful to lay your emotions out for yourself and try to find order for them, and that can help you process things, but also I think it can help you feel less alone. So if somebody hears something that you've made, whether it's a song or a poem, and they can relate to it, I think that causes some really helpful conversation. And maybe that'll give you the confidence to speak up and talk to a parent or talk to a loved one about what you're going through. Or, you can just rant and then keep it all to yourself. It doesn't really have to go anywhere. But I think for me, at least over the past 10 or something years writing music and writing poetry, it's just been a really catalyzing experience to have healing in some way, to some degree, whatever that might mean to you. But to me, it definitely has to do with breaking things down, making sense of it, relating it to other experiences that other Native writers are writing about, so I feel less alone. I think that kind of thing really has proven helpful to me in my mental health. In the National Museum of the American Indian, Vermonto. In the National Museum of the American Indian, you are cruising through a gallery, gazing at Susan and Russell and Hank, photos of AIM with long hair parted down the middle, beads bright at the throats of frozen protesters, when so suddenly you think of your father, his hardened hands and voice that would shake itself violent, but how once when you were small, you came to NMAI, and surrounded by white people, he shook his long hair out from its tie, stopped in front of each photo, and you saw his eyes grow soft as they sometimes would, deep in the summers, when your mother brought champa and kissed him gently. It was quiet then, when the wild rice bloomed, when he did not hide himself from you. Thank you so much for having me today.